My name is Tara. I'm a 29-year-old woman living in a small suburban neighborhood just outside of the city. It's a quiet place, and that's how I like it. I work from home, and when the day is done, I enjoy the peace and quiet. This night had started like any other. It was winter in New England, so the nights were long, and everything felt extra quiet. I'd spent the evening inside, getting some work done. The usual, nothing out of the ordinary. But when I finished up my last project of the day, I decided that I'd take a walk before bed. It's something that I try to do almost every night, just to clear my head and unwind. My routine never really changes. The neighborhood is safe, quiet, and everyone knows each other, even if it's just by sight. The houses are close together, but I'm one of the few who lives at the end of the street. I slipped on my coat, grabbed my keys, and stepped outside. The cold felt good. I could already hear the crunch of the snow beneath my boots as I made my way down the driveway. As I walked down the street, the world around me seemed to fade. There was no traffic, no one walking around. I took a deep breath, trying to relax my shoulders and leave the stress of the day behind. I had no reason to expect anything out of the ordinary. I was just another person going for a walk in the neighborhood at night. But as I reached the end of the street, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. It was a figure standing there. My heart skipped, just for a second. I couldn't place what I was seeing. It was just there, still, almost like it was waiting for something. The area around my house was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the streetlights. As I squinted, trying to focus on the figure, I relaxed. It was just a kid, a little girl to be specific. But that relaxation was short-lived, because for one reason or another, I started having this feeling of extreme doom. At first, I didn't relate the kid to the doom. I guess I was just concerned that this was a little kid alone at night. So I approached her, asking if she was okay. The first thing I noticed was the child's pale skin, even under the dim light. Her skin was so pale it was almost gray. She was dressed in dark clothes, but the clothes looked too big for her, and the color definitely contrasted the pale skin, which made her seem even paler. She didn't speak. She just stared at the ground. She had long blonde hair that hung straight at the sides of her face, and the hair was partially covering her face. But even then, I could see there was an absolute lack of expression on her little face. I'm not sure what made me start moving again, probably just how creepy this kid made me feel, but I started walking back towards the house, telling myself that it was nothing. As I walked, I kept glancing over my shoulder. The girl hadn't moved, at least not at first, but when I turned around the corner to the driveway, I heard it, the crunch of snow. I looked back again and saw the child was following me, slowly, like she was aware of every step she was taking, and she wasn't in any rush. My pace quickened, and I hurried toward the door. I told myself it was fine, that I was just being paranoid. Kids do weird things, right? Maybe she was lost, or maybe just even looking for attention. Something about it didn't sit right with me, though. The sound of the crunching snow was getting closer, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the child was mirroring my movements, keeping a steady pace behind me. I reached the door of my house and glanced back again. The child was now only a few feet away from me, standing at the edge of the light. She was close enough that I could see the strange blackness of her eyes. I didn't get a good look at the eyes at first, but when I did, I didn't know what the hell I was looking at. Her eyes looked like shark eyes, completely black, even where the white part and the colored part should be. I asked what she wanted, if she needed help, or where her parents were, but all she said was, "Can I please use your bathroom?" The voice was soft and monotone. It was almost like a whisper, but there was no emotion behind it. No urgency like a little kid that actually needs to use the bathroom would have. It was like the words were memorized, and the hollow quality of the voice only made my skin crawl even more. I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't that. The words hung in the air, empty, and for a moment, I couldn't move. I lied and told her the bathroom wasn't working. I felt stupid for even saying it, but I knew just some way that I shouldn't let this kid into my house. But she didn't seem to hear me, or maybe she didn't care. The next words came, as flat and lifeless as the first. "I need to use your phone." I shook my head, trying to push down the rising panic. She was just a kid. Maybe she was lost. Maybe she was desperate. I kept telling myself these things over and over again. Just a kid. She's just a kid. But the way her words were delivered, it all just felt wrong. Like she was trying to trap me or something. She moved closer. I could feel the tension creeping up my spine and the hairs on my neck standing on end. Something about the way she followed me, and the way she said the words like she didn't fully understand what she was asking, it just felt wrong. I reached the doorstep. She spoke again. "Let me in. I need to come in. Please." It was like the words were being forced out. It was the same as before, but this time, there was something different about her voice. Like she was trying to command me to listen to her instructions. And her voice grew slightly louder, but still there was no emotion behind it. No pleading, no anger, no desperation. It felt like an empty command. It wasn't just the words that started to get to me either, it was the tone. Like she'd been taught to say these things, and like she was running on autopilot. I pressed the keys into the lock. My fingers felt numb. I don't know if it was from the cold or the fear, but I just needed to get inside. I didn't want to look at the kid anymore. Didn't want to see those black eyes. I felt the coldness shift in the air. It wasn't just the winter air anymore that was getting to me. It was the presence of this creature, this being. And that's when I started to realize that there might be something more than just a little girl trying to get inside. Maybe this was some kind of monster that made itself look like a little girl. And then I had the realization that monsters might actually be real. It was like that fear and that cold seeped into my bones. When I stepped inside, the pressure intensified. There was something pushing back, like something stopping this kid or this thing from getting any closer. Like this invisible wall had suddenly appeared between us. I didn't know if it was just my imagination, but it felt real. Like some unseen barrier. Something not allowing this child to cross into my home. I didn't question it. "Let me in. I need help." She spoke faster this time, like she had started to panic, but the words were still empty. There was no urgency or fear, just this strange robotic repetition. Even as my brain yelled to shut the door on this thing, I couldn't stop focusing on its eyes. Black, emotionless eyes. It felt like they were reading my entire life or something, or maybe reading my mind. I have no idea what these things are capable of. I just know that standing there looking at this little whatever it was, I felt a pull not to move away from the door, and maybe even a pull to go back outside. I couldn't tear my gaze away from this child. Every second I stared, the more the coldness pressed against me though, heavier and heavier, like something unnatural was pulling at the air between us. But the child didn't move past the threshold of my home. I felt like it couldn't. There was something holding it back. I knew I had to act, but I just stood there, frozen. My hand was gripping the door handle tighter, but it was like the act of pulling the door toward me was fighting against something. "You can let me in. Everything will be fine." Every word felt like a weight pressing down on me, trying to get my brain and body to move against my will and invite it in. It felt like I was being held in place by something beyond my own control. I wanted to push the door closed. I felt like I had to. But as I tried, I could feel resistance in my own body. It was like there was something invisible and otherworldly working against me. And then, for a split second, I felt something strange. Like something pulling me toward the child. But it wasn't a physical tug. More like some unseen force was grabbing me and pulling me towards it. I shook my head and snapped back to reality. I think that sensation was so distinct that it snapped me out of whatever trance this thing was holding me in. No, this wasn't happening. I wasn't letting this thing in. With more determination than I've ever had in my life, I slammed the door shut. I fought against whatever psychic hold this thing had on me, and finally managed to put the door between me and it. The feeling of release was immediate. Like I could breathe again. Like I'd been holding my breath this whole time. But I realized the child wasn't gone. I turned and looked through the window beside the door. There she was, just standing in the yard, unmoving. Her eyes felt like they were locked on mine and burning through the window, still just waiting for me to invite her in. I wanted to scream. I needed something to make sense, but I couldn't find the words. There was no way that a normal child was standing out there. I couldn't convince myself otherwise, no matter how much I wanted to. That thing made itself look like a child, but it was not a child at all. I looked out the window again, just peeking through the curtain, and the driveway was empty. The night dragged on, but my thoughts wouldn't let up. I didn't want to be alone, but I had nobody to call over. I don't think I slept well any night after that for a long time, but I never had to deal with the kid from hell either, so I guess that's a win. Now that I've had time to think about it, to try and make sense of the whole thing, the truth is, I'm still not sure what to think. The more I mull it over, the more I realize that my brain can't seem to settle on one explanation. I don't want to believe it was anything supernatural or otherworldly, but at the same time, I can't ignore the fact that it felt like nothing normal was happening. I've heard of the black-eyed kid since then. I've read enough to recognize that what I saw matches some of the descriptions that people talk about. That's what scares me the most. The way that it felt. The way it just stood there, staring. That weird pressure that came with it. It wasn't just a kid asking for help. Something was out there that wasn't human, and it was trying to prey on me. But why? I have no idea, and I don't want to know. So yeah, maybe it was some kind of manifestation, a strange event I won't fully understand ever, or maybe it's something that's been around for longer than we think, a type of creature, something that exists on the edge of what we know. But maybe, until now, we've just chosen to ignore it. It was just another regular evening in the suburbs, the night my life went from boring to something I still can't share with a lot of people. Nothing unusual, just the kind of evening where the sound of someone mowing their lawn cut through the quiet and made you realize you should probably mow your own grass too before you got in trouble by your parents. I was walking home from a friend's house, taking the long route because I had the time. There wasn't much to do when you're a teenager in a quiet neighborhood like this, and I liked one of the girls that we were hanging out with. It wasn't too late, but the street was still pretty empty. Most of the houses had their lights off, and the neighborhood was winding down for the night. I didn't think much of it, but I always felt a little weird walking home in the dark, even though nothing had ever happened. There was that feeling that when you're the only one around, it's just a bit eerie, you know, the creeps kind of set in. I was near the park when I first saw the kid. At first, I thought he might have been a neighbor's son, someone that I didn't recognize, but I realized I'd never seen him. He was standing on the sidewalk, a little ways ahead of me, but he wasn't moving, just standing there. I figured he'd be gone by the time I got closer, but as I walked, I noticed he didn't seem to notice me at all. He just kept standing, facing forward, almost like he was waiting for someone. It wasn't unusual for people to be out at night around here, but the way he was just standing there, still as a statue, gave me a bad feeling. As I got closer, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the kid standing there alone at that hour. It was the way he looked. He was small, maybe around 10. He had a hoodie on, though it was warmer than usual that night. The strange thing was how he was positioned. His face wasn't turned towards me, but it felt like he was aware of me somehow. Like his attention was fixed on me, even though he wasn't looking directly at me. When I was about 15 feet away, I slowed down a little, not sure if I should say something or keep walking. The kid's head turned just enough to catch my eye, and that's when I noticed his eyes. They were completely black. No white, no irises, just dark, empty sockets staring back at me. My heart dropped. I didn't know what it was, but there was something in the way he looked at me that made my stomach twist. It felt like he was sizing me up, but also like he wasn't really seeing me. His gaze was intense in a way that didn't make sense. You know how when you look at someone, you can tell if they're paying attention or not? This felt different, like he wasn't really seeing me as a person, just something he was waiting for. I stopped walking, unsure of what to do. He didn't move, but he tilted his head, still staring at me. After a few long seconds, he spoke. His voice was almost too soft to hear over the sounds of the neighborhood. "Hey, can you come with me?" His voice was calm and polite, but there was an edge to it too, and that edge made my skin prickle. I didn't answer right away. I didn't know what to say. People don't just ask strangers to go with them, especially not kids. and his eyes were the thing that I couldn't stop thinking about. I looked around, half expecting someone to be standing by, someone watching, maybe playing a prank, but the street was empty. It was just as quiet as it had been before. I took a few steps back, trying to avoid looking at him too much, and I said, "Sorry, I'm not sure what you mean." I figured if I ignored him, he'd just go away. But he didn't. "I really need you to come with me," he said. But his tone was unchanged, still polite, yet there was this persistence to it now. His head didn't move, but his eyes never left me. I couldn't explain it, but I felt this pressure start to rise up in my chest, like an unease that came out of nowhere and I couldn't shake it off. It wasn't just normal for someone to ask like that. It wasn't normal for a kid to be out here, alone at night, with eyes that looked like something out of a nightmare. I took another step back. "I can't. I'm just going home, and I have a curfew." I was trying to sound casual, but my voice cracked just a little. He didn't seem bothered by my refusal. Instead, he took a step forward, but not in a way that seemed like he was trying to close the distance between us. It was more like he was trying to make me feel trapped, like the space between us was just as important as the distance itself. "You have to come with me," he repeated, and this time there was something in his voice that sounded urgent. I felt my breath catch in my throat, and I took another step back, but my feet suddenly felt heavier than usual. I told myself to just keep walking, to ignore him, but my legs wouldn't move. Something about this kid felt wrong. It was the way he spoke and the way he acted, like he was just playing a part or something. I had no reason to go with him. I didn't know him, and there was nothing normal about any of this. "Please, just come with me," he said. And this time, it was like his words were soothing, like he was trying to make me feel guilty for not helping him. I shook my head, and I forced myself to turn away. "I can't. I don't even know you," I told him. "Don't you want to help me?" His voice seemed softer now, like he was pleading, but there was something else buried in it. Something colder, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. "No, I can't," I told him. I was trying to sound more certain this time, but my words felt weak, and I could feel my body shaking. I couldn't explain why I was so creeped out, but here I was, trying to avoid being taken by some black-eyed child and not knowing anything about it at the time. I think my body was just telling me to be prepared to run. Honestly, I wasn't even sure why I was still standing there talking to him. I should have just turned around and walked away, but my feet were basically glued to the pavement. The kid took another step closer. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as he did. It wasn't like he was getting closer in a natural way either. He was closing in, but without moving any faster. Just slowly, like he was stalking me or something. "I need you to come with me." His voice was suddenly firm, and his calm tone was turning into something more like a command. I don't know what it was, but at that moment, it felt like something inside me understood what he was saying, like I had to follow him. My instincts were screaming at me to run, to get away, but my legs still wouldn't obey. And part of me wanted to just go with him. Then he took another small step forward. He was so close now, I could feel his presence pressing down on me. I couldn't look away from his eyes. They were so black. No whites, no pupils, just solid black. Empty. There was nothing human in them. But still, as I stared into them, I felt this calm wash over me. And I honestly feel like these things, whatever they are, have the ability to hypnotize you. "Why do you want me to go with you?" I asked, but part of me didn't even care. Part of me just wanted to accept his invitation. He didn't answer for a few seconds. He just stared, like he was considering how to respond. Then he said, "I just need you to come with me. It'll be okay." I didn't know why, but at that point, I felt like if I stayed any longer, I'd lose my ability to think clearly, and I needed to leave. It was like my logical brain was fighting with whatever part of me was hypnotized. And thankfully, that logical part was outweighing the hypnosis. I snapped out of it. I turned around quickly, trying not to look back at him, and started walking faster. But I couldn't stop myself from looking over my shoulder just one time. This kid was standing in the same spot, still staring at me. He didn't call after me, didn't try to chase me down. It was almost like he was thinking of something else to say to get me to go with him. I kept walking. I went faster and faster with each step, but my mind was racing. I couldn't get those eyes out of my head. I didn't know who or what he was, but I knew something was definitely not right. I didn't stop walking until I was home. My feet felt like they were moving on their own at this point. I could feel the cold sweat on the back of my neck, and I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting him to be there. But luckily he wasn't. By the time I turned onto my street, I was almost running. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, even if I couldn't see him. It felt like he was there with me. I rushed to my front door and glanced down the street as I pushed the code to unlock the door. Nobody was there. I slammed the door shut behind me, and for a moment I just stood there, leaning against it, trying to calm my breathing. My heart was still beating faster than it should have, and I couldn't get that image of his eyes out of my head. It felt like I almost crossed a line, like I'd narrowly avoided something dangerous. I stayed inside for the rest of the night, keeping the lights on, even though I knew it wouldn't make any difference. My parents were still at my aunt and uncle's house. I just wanted them home. I didn't want to be alone. I didn't want to go near the windows either. I didn't want to see the street outside. When my parents finally got home, I felt a little more relieved. I didn't tell them what I'd saw, but I knew I was safe with them home. Hopefully. It took me a long time to fall asleep that night. I kept replaying the night over and over in my head. I was trying to make myself feel better by rationalizing that it was just some kid playing a prank on me. That lie would have worked if it wasn't for the gut-wrenching terror that my body felt when I was around that kid, or the weird mesmerizing way his eyes seemed to draw me in. The next morning, everything seemed normal again. The sun was up and the neighborhood was as busy as it always is, but I couldn't shake that nagging feeling. What had that kid wanted? And why me? I didn't have an answer. I tried to forget about it, but something about the whole thing stuck with me, even for years after that. Every time I walked home from a friend's house or past that spot on the street, I felt a cold chill run down my spine, like the memory of those black eyes was still watching me. And every now and then, when I'm out late, I can't help but glance down the street, expecting to see that kid standing there. But he's never there. Hopefully he's moved on, or went home to wherever the hell that is. And by hell, that might actually mean literal hell. I don't know who or what he was, but I'll never forget the way he looked at me. I can't explain it, but I know what I felt, and I'll always wonder if that was the last time I'll ever see him, or if he's still out there, waiting for another chance to get me to go with him. I remember that night like it was yesterday, but it feels like a lifetime ago. My name is Gabrielle, and I've always been someone who walks a different path. Growing up in a small neighborhood, it was hard to find others who understood the way that I felt connected to the earth, to the seasons, and to the rhythms of nature. But that was fine. I found my own way, as I always had. You see, I'm a pagan. I have been for as long as I can remember. It's not just something I do, it's part of who I am. My beliefs center on the balance between nature and the spiritual world, the energies that flow through everything. On the night of Beltane, which is a celebration of the coming of summer, I felt more connected to the world than usual. It's a time to honor the earth's fertility, the blossoming of life, and the renewal that comes with the season. Beltane is sacred to me. It's when the veil between the worlds feels the thinnest to me. Other than Samhain, of course. It's a time when the spirits and the forces beyond our realm can reach through. I've always celebrated it with rituals, dancing around a bonfire, honoring the gods and the earth, and calling upon spirits of nature to guide and protect me. That night, like most years, I'd done all of that. Beltane is a time of deep connection to the natural world, a celebration that the forces are driving forward life. Every year, I honor the turning of the wheel, the transition from the darkness of winter into the light and energy of the summer. It's a reminder that life and death are part of a natural cycle, a larger cycle. It's also a time to celebrate the fertility of Earth, the blooming of flowers, and the rising warmth of the sun. I've always believed that this is when the energies of the unseen world can move most freely. It's why Beltane is often a time of rituals and prayer, to ask for protection and guidance, to honor the spirits of nature, and to keep the malevolent forces at bay. I wasn't scared of the spirits. I'd been working with energies, both light and dark, for as long as I could remember. But I also knew the dangers of being too reckless, of ignoring the boundaries that should be respected. I understood that the natural world, while beautiful and giving, also had its shadows. It was essential to remain balanced and aware. That night, I'd been at my friend Mia's house for a long time, just hanging out. She was the only one in the neighborhood who really understood my practices. We'd talk about the old ways, we'd had some wine, and talked about our summer plans. I'd stayed a little later than I'd planned, but the walk home wasn't far, and I knew the streets like the back of my hand. No one would even be out at this hour. It was a work night, and the air was crisp and calm. It was the kind of night you could get lost in your own thoughts. As I started my walk home, I wasn't thinking about anything in particular. I had my hoodie on and my hands in my pockets. My mind was wandering through the rituals that I'd performed earlier, and I had a feeling of satisfaction of how things had gone. The neighborhood was quiet, but there was something about this night that just felt off to me. It was subtle at first, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, but I felt it all the way down into my bones. The peacefulness of the night should have been comforting. It was everything I could have asked for. There was a quiet, cool breeze flowing through the trees, and the soft hum of the neighborhood. Yet, something was just tugging at me, like a feeling I couldn't quite name. The darkness just seemed deeper than usual, if that makes any sense at all. It wasn't the kind of darkness you get when the sun had just set and the world's still transitioning. It was like the darkness was thicker, more present. I pushed the thought aside. I had rituals to keep things balanced, and I had the experience to know when something was truly wrong. But I felt that little twinge of discomfort in my stomach. By the time I reached the alley that cut through the neighborhood, the unease had felt deeper. I'd walked this path dozens of times before, and nothing about it had ever given me a reason to feel uncomfortable, so I brushed it off at first. I'd had enough experience working with energy to know that sometimes the world around us just shifts without explanation. But maybe the shift was in me. Maybe it wasn't the world at all. But it felt as though there was this undercurrent, something I wasn't fully perceiving but could sense nonetheless. The nightbirds had stopped singing. That was odd, even for this time of night. Normally, there would be the occasional song from one of the nightbirds, but tonight, it was still. Not a sound. And then I felt it. That subtle but unmistakable shift in the energy around me. The hairs on my arms even stood up. I'd never felt anything like this alarm before. It wasn't fear exactly. It was an awareness, like a realization that something was out of place. My pagan practices had taught me to be in tune with my surroundings, to understand the ebb and flow of energy. But this just felt wrong in a way that I couldn't explain. I paused in the middle of the alley because that fear and that alarm was just so deep. I muttered a quick prayer underneath my breath, asking for protection. The symbols I'd drawn earlier in my rituals were still fresh in my mind, and I visualized them then, wrapping myself in the protective energy they offered. But the feeling didn't ease. If anything, it grew stronger. And that's when I saw this young boy, no more than 10 or 11, and he was standing there alone in the dark. His clothes looked old-fashioned, way too old-fashioned to have some kid wearing them now, and he shouldn't be out this time of night anyway. He had this worn, faded jacket on that looked like it hadn't seen the light in years, and these pants that didn't quite fit him right. It was strange, but not immediately alarming. He was just standing there, facing away from me, completely still. I stopped walking, though. I got this feeling that something just wasn't right. It was like an instinct, a gut feeling that told me to stay away. But on the other hand, I couldn't turn around either. Then he turned, slowly, almost unnaturally so, as though his body wasn't quite moving the way that it should. His head turned and his eyes told me everything I needed to know. This was a supernatural being. The blackness of them was so complete that I couldn't see anything else. Just black, not even the faintest glimmer of white or color. I took a step back, but a slow one. At that point, I felt like I couldn't move any faster, like I was caught in some kind of invisible web. And then I heard his voice. It was soft and almost childlike, but there was something wrong with it. "Can you help me?" But when he said it, the words were flat. It was too emotionless for a child. I need you to come with me. I didn't answer. Something about his voice, the way he spoke, sent a jolt of pure panic through me. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I stood there, paralyzed. The weight of that gaze felt like it was pressing down on me and drawing me closer. He took a step forward towards me, and I flinched. He stopped in his tracks, but his eyes never left mine. And that's when I heard this soft rustling sound coming from behind him. And then, another figure emerged from the darkness. At first, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There were two of them. The second child was just as strange, just as wrong. She was a girl, maybe around the same age, but her hair was too straight, too smooth, as though it had been perfectly combed, even though she was standing out there in the middle of the night. She wore this old-looking dress too, something out of a time period that didn't fit. Her skin was so pale it was gray, but it was her eyes that made me shudder. Just like her companion, her eyes were completely black, devoid of any other color. The girl's gaze was fixed on me too, but her expression was almost too calm. It was blank, almost. I couldn't explain it, but there was something about her presence that made the air feel thicker, like the very space around her was warping or something. I couldn't seem to tear myself away from them. "Come with us," the girl said. Her voice was cold and emotionless, just like the boy's. "We need you to come with us." Her words sent a wave of panic crashing over me. I felt like I was being surrounded. They were getting closer, both of them slowly inching towards me. Their movements were stiff and unnatural, like marionettes being pulled on strings. "Why?" I managed to ask. I tried to sound brave, but I knew deep down that this was wrong. Everything about this was wrong, and I couldn't push that fear away. "Because you have to," the boy said, but he wouldn't give any actual reason. And then the temperature seemed to drop around us. They were so close now, and I still couldn't look away. But it was like the closer they got, the colder the air was. And it was like their eyes were holding me captive. Something deep in my gut told me that if I let them take me, I wouldn't be coming back. Not the way I was. I knew I had to get away. The boy took another step forward. His expression was blank, and his eyes were dark. He told me to come with them again. I knew if I stayed any longer, if I didn't break free, I wouldn't make it. I had never messed with the darker things in my practice, but in that moment, I couldn't deny what was right in front of me. These weren't just lost kids. These things were something else. Something dark. The girl was so close now, I could reach out and touch her, but I didn't dare do that. Her eyes held something beyond this world, something I wasn't prepared to understand. "Please, leave me alone," I whispered. I couldn't do anything more than a whisper, but they didn't respond. These things didn't even blink. And then, something felt like it shifted in me. It was like I realized that the knowledge that I gained over the years rushed back into me like a flood. I wasn't just a passive observer. This was the world of the unseen, and I knew something about it. Beltane wasn't just a time for celebrating life. It was a time for warding off the darkness, for strengthening the boundaries between the realms. I'd drawn from my protected symbols earlier that evening. I was asking for guidance, for protection from anything that might breach that veil. I reached into my pocket and pulled out this small vial of sea salt. It was something that I'd always carried. It was simple, but a powerful warding tool. I fumbled it open, spilled some of it onto the ground, but I didn't even care. I had to focus, had to get them away from me before they dragged me into whatever nightmare that they'd come from. I whispered another prayer under my breath, soft but steady. It wasn't complicated. It didn't need to be. It was a reminder that I wasn't defenseless, that I had the earth on my side. For a split second, both of them flinched. The space between us felt different, like something had shifted in the balance of power. They both stopped moving. The girl blinked once, slowly, like she was irritated by the interruption. But the boy's lips curled into something like a smile, but it was all wrong. "It won't work," he said. His voice was low and mocking now. He had no real understanding of fear. What I was doing wasn't enough. I had to get out of there. I had to move before they closed in on me again. In that instant, everything inside me clicked. The protected energy I'd called upon wasn't enough to keep them away. But there was something else, something even more primal that I could rely on. The earth. Without thinking, I threw the glass vial at the ground. No, not for a spell or anything like that. That only works in the movies. I threw it down so the noise would snap me out of the trance. I knew that I was in some kind of trance, and at that moment it was clear that I had to do something to snap myself out of it. When the glass broke, I focused again, and I knew I had one more option. I ran. I didn't look back. My legs moved on instinct, carrying me down the alley and into the open street. The air actually seemed to clear as I ran. My heart was a wild drumbeat in my chest, and every breath felt sharp and shallow, like I couldn't catch enough air. When I got to the edge of my neighborhood, I had to stop and catch my breath, but I didn't stop moving. I just slowed down. The boy and the girl hadn't followed me. The air felt normal again. My thoughts spun as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. Was it some kind of dark magic? Was I being targeted because of my beliefs or my rituals? I didn't know. I'd never encountered anything like that before. I glanced down at my hands. I was still shaking. My idea had worked, at least in part. I'd managed to break whatever hold they had on me, long enough to escape. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I would never know. Whatever it wasn't meant for me to understand. I had barely survived that encounter, and the last thing I wanted was to dig deeper into something that felt so wrong. But I couldn't deny that it had happened. I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen something. I thought about them again, and those eyes. I turned and walked towards home. As I walked, the weight of what happened began to settle in, sinking deeper into my bones. I had always been someone who worked with the unseen, but nothing had prepared me for this. For them. Those children weren't part of the world that I knew. They weren't ghosts or spirits. They felt like something darker, something older. And the encounter left a mark on me, one I couldn't erase. I felt like I had touched something that was never meant for human eyes. And despite the relief of escaping, a part of me was still haunted by what I didn't know. For now, I'll keep my wards strong and my intentions clear. That night was a reminder of the power that existed beyond what we could see. And I had learned some things. Even the darkest things can slip through the cracks in the world, waiting for a chance to be noticed. Thank you for sharing this story, and for talking with me about beliefs that we both share. It's good to know how open-minded you are. Blessed be. Gabrielle. I don't really know where to start. Nothing like this has ever happened to me before, and I don't think I've been able to sleep right since. Maybe it sounds crazy. I'd think the same thing if someone told me this, but I swear that it happened. It was a Friday night, and I was home alone. My wife and kids were visiting her parents for the weekend, and I'd stayed back to catch up on some work. We live in a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing ever happens. You know the type. It was the kind of place you never think of as creepy, not even at night. I was in the living room, just unwinding after dinner that I'd made myself. The TV was on, and I'd had a beer in hand, flipping through channels and not really watching anything. It was around 9:30 when I heard a knock at the front door. But it wasn't a normal knock either. It was soft, almost hesitant, like whoever was out there didn't really want to knock in the first place. It caught me off guard. We don't usually get visitors that late, and I wasn't expecting anyone. For a second, I thought maybe it was a neighbor who needed something, or maybe a package being delivered. Still, I hesitated because it was so late. But I got up anyway and walked to the door. As I passed the window, I glanced outside, but the porch light wasn't on. It was pitch black out there. I couldn't see a thing. I remember feeling a weird sort of chill, like the air had turned cooler or something. When I opened the door, I saw a kid standing there on the porch. At first, I thought it was a boy of maybe 10 or 11 years old. He was wearing a hoodie that looked a little too big for him, and his face was pale, like he hadn't been outside in over a month. He didn't say anything right away, just stood there staring down at the ground. I asked him if I could help him. When the kid finally looked up at me, well, that's when I noticed something was off. For starters, his face was blank, like he was completely void of emotion. No smile, no frown, just empty. And oh yeah, I swear his eyes were blacker than black. Not dark brown or shadowed by the porch light, but solid black, like a shark. No white, no pupils, nothing. No iris, no color, just black. It was like looking into two bottomless pits. My stomach dropped instantly. I don't know how to explain it, but every instinct I had screamed at me to shut the door and lock it. But I didn't. I felt frozen, like my body wasn't my own anymore. Like my body couldn't move. "Can I come in?" the boy asked. His voice was flat, like he'd been reciting something that he'd memorized. "What?" The question snapped me out of whatever trance that I was in. "Can I come in?" he repeated. "I need to use your phone." My brain scrambled to make sense of the situation. Maybe he was lost, I thought. Maybe he needed help, but something about the way he stood there, so calm and still, just didn't feel right to me. "Where are your parents?" He didn't answer. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, like he was confused by the question. "Please, let me in." His voice actually sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't the words themselves, it was how he said them. There was no emotion in him at all. Just nothing. It's weird to try to explain this fear that I felt if you haven't felt it yourself, but staring at this little kid was like some innate terror, and that terror was gripping me and telling me not to let this kid inside. "I can call someone for you, but you can't come in," I told him. The boy's expression didn't change, but he moved his head back and forth, looking me over like he was studying me. "I need to come inside," he said. It was firm this time, but it was like he wasn't grasping the fact that I told him that he couldn't come in. It was like whatever he had memorized, he was just repeating again, hoping that the answer would be different this time. But the way he said it, it didn't seem like a request. It was almost like a command, and for a split second, I felt this overwhelming urge to just listen to his command, to let him in. It was like I didn't have a choice. But then that feeling of dread came rushing back, and it was stronger than before. "No." I stepped back from the door. "You need to leave." He didn't move. He continued to just stand there, staring at me with those hollow eyes. "Please," he said again, but this time there was something even more off about his voice, like it didn't belong to the child that I was looking at. I slammed the door shut after that. It was the only thing I could think of. I stood there for a second, my hand still gripping the doorknob, my chest tight like I'd just run a mile. After a few moments, I peeked through the peephole. The kid hadn't left. He was still there, just standing on my porch. But he wasn't looking at the door anymore. He was staring down at the ground, motionless. His arms hung limp at his sides. It was like those movies where you see a robot get turned off. But even without moving, he spoke again. "Let me in." There was no more fake politeness in his voice. This was a demand, and whatever that thing was that was making itself look like a kid wasn't going to take no for an answer. It felt like the temperature in the room had dropped 10 degrees. My gut was screaming at me not to answer, but I couldn't stop myself. "You need to leave," I yelled. I had the intention of sounding intimidating, but my voice came out quiet. There was a long pause, and then softly he said, "If you don't let me in, I can't leave." It didn't make any sense, but it hit me like a riddle that I couldn't figure out. What did he mean he couldn't leave? I raced for an explanation, but nothing about this was normal. I stepped back from the door, feeling like I needed space, and no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, the fear in my gut wouldn't go away. And then the knock came again. It was louder this time. I grabbed my phone off the coffee table and dialed 911. My hands were shaking so hard that it was hard to hit the buttons right. When the operator picked up, I started rambling about the kid on my porch, how he was acting strange and wouldn't leave. She said she'd send someone over to help. I stood there staring at the door. I don't know how long I stood there staring at the door, but I just waited. 5 minutes, maybe 10. I was just waiting for the police to show up. I thought about looking through the peephole again, but what if he was still out there? It didn't take long for him to answer that question, though, because he knocked again. I yelled that the police were on their way and that he needed to leave. But I don't think the boy cared. because he demanded to be let in again, and louder than the last time. His voice sounded sharper, like he was annoyed. Let me in. His words echoed in my head, and I felt that strange pull again, that overwhelming urge to open the door. My hand moved toward the doorknob without me even realizing it, and I had to force myself to stop. I yelled at him to go away, and then it was silent for a brief moment. And then I heard a faint tapping coming from the window behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly tripped. The curtains were drawn, but the tapping continued, like someone gently drumming their fingers on the glass. I didn't want to look, but I did. I pulled the curtain back just enough to peek outside, and there he was, standing in the middle of my yard, staring up at the window. Those empty black eyes just stared at me, emotionless, soulless, and then he smiled. But that smile sent ice down my spine. It wasn't a normal smile. It was too wide and too forced. It had no real emotion in it. The boy stood perfectly still in the yard, not moving an inch, just staring up at me with that unnatural grin plastered on his pale face. I thought about calling 911 again to let them know what was happening, but what would I even say? The kid moved to my yard? I doubted they'd understand, and besides, I didn't want it to look like I was losing my mind, or playing a prank on them and making it up. What if they stopped their police from coming over and helping? Instead, I backed away from the window and turned off all the lights in the living room. If he couldn't see me, maybe he'd leave. I moved to the kitchen, where the window above the sink gave me a partial view of the yard. I peeked out cautiously, hoping he'd be gone, but of course he wasn't. Now he was standing closer to the house, near the bushes by the porch. I didn't understand why he kept relocating. Every time I looked out the window, he was standing in a different spot, still in my lawn, but in a different area. His face was still tilted up toward the window, and though I couldn't see his eyes clearly in the darkness, I could feel them. I ducked below the counter. What was this kid? He didn't act like any child I'd ever seen. And those eyes. Something about those eyes told me that what I was looking at was so wrong. So wrong that I didn't even have words for it. And until I researched afterwards, I had no idea just how important it was to stay in the house and not let this thing get next to me. The knocking started again, but it was at the back door this time. I actually crawled across the floor, keeping low, and peered around the corner, just toward the back door. The glass pane in the door was frosted, so I couldn't make out any details, but I could see the vague outline of a figure standing on the other side. I can see you. Please let me in. I lost it. How could he possibly see me through that frosted glass? I already had a feeling that whatever I was dealing with wasn't a human kid, but now I started accepting that fact. Then he spoke again, and I swear this time he sounded like he was almost begging me. Please, I can't leave unless you let me in. That was enough. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911 again, not caring if they thought I was crazy. The operator answered. Hello? What's your emergency? There's a kid at my house. He won't leave and he's knocking on all my doors. Are you in any immediate danger? I don't know, but something's not right. Okay, an officer is on the way. Do you want me to stay on the line with you until he's there? I said no and hung up. I shouldn't have, but I think I needed to concentrate on the door and the thing outside, and not the voice on the other end of the phone. I sank to the floor, my back against the cabinets. I didn't care how long it took. I wasn't moving until the cops got there. The house was silent again, but I didn't trust it. And then what sounded like someone running their hand down the front window broke the silence. Even though I told myself I wasn't going to look, I looked. I told myself to stay put. I told myself to wait for the police. But there was this crazy pull to look, like the thought had entered my mind against my will. So I found myself creeping forward in the living room, staying low and peeking around the corner. The boy was there, his face pressed against the glass. It was like he knew exactly what I was going to do, because he looked right at me. I froze. His face was right up against the glass, almost touching the glass with his nose. For a moment, neither of us moved. We were locked in a stare. It was like time had stopped, and the air in the room had been sucked out. and then he knocked as I watched him. Just once, a single, slow tap of his knuckles against the window. He gave me another one of those fake-ass smiles and said, "I know you're scared, but you don't have to be. Just let me in." His voice sounded so wrong, so calm, like he wasn't really trying to comfort me, but only pretending to try to comfort me. I shook my head. "No," I croaked out. He still didn't move. He just stared at me through the glass. I couldn't look away from those eyes, no matter how much I wanted to. They weren't human. I knew that much for sure now. Finally, I heard the faint sound of a car engine. I prayed that it was the police. Relief washed all over me. Help was finally here. I could see flashing lights bouncing off the walls from the living room window. The boy stepped back from the glass, but didn't break his stare. Then he shook his head like he was simulating disappointment. But I doubted whatever this thing was could actually feel human emotions. He kept stepping backwards, not looking away, and finally turned and walked off. I lost sight of him around the corner, but it didn't matter because the cops were pulling up. When I saw one of the officers get out of the car, I ran to the door and flung it open. I couldn't even begin to describe the feeling of relief that I felt that night. I told him everything about the boy, including the black eyes. I didn't care what he thought about me. I told him about the knocking, but the more I talked, the crazier I sounded to myself. The officer gave me that polite but skeptical look, and I knew that he didn't believe what I was telling him. He thought I was just some dumbass that had misidentified a child that was knocking and harassing me. I know that he didn't believe me about the black eyes. But both officers checked the yard and the surrounding area, but of course, they didn't find anything. No footprints, no sign that anyone had ever been there at all. "Probably just a kid pulling a prank," one of them said. I know he was trying to reassure me, but one, it didn't reassure me at all, and two, I knew better. The officers left about 20 minutes later, promising to patrol the neighborhood. I went inside and locked every door and window in the house and sat in the living room, clutching my phone like a lifeline. I didn't sleep that night. I mean, how could I? The following morning, I still couldn't shake the weight of what happened off. I called out of work, telling my boss I was sick. I wasn't really lying. I felt sick, not physically, but mentally. I spent hours pacing the house, replaying every moment of the encounter in my mind. Who or what was the boy? I just knew that the thing that I had seen last night was not a real child. It was something that only makes itself look like one. By mid-afternoon, I decided to do some research. If the police weren't going to take me seriously, maybe I could find something on my own. I started by researching stories about kids acting strangely, or unusual things involving door-to-door encounters. Reading the accounts online made my skin crawl. It wasn't just that they sounded familiar. It was like someone had written down my exact experience. A child or two, always pale, always unnerving, knocking on doors late at night and asking to be let in. The descriptions matched perfectly. The strange, flat tone of their voice, their odd mannerisms, and most disturbingly, the pitch black eyes. They're called black-eyed children. The more I read, the worse I felt. A lot of the stories talked about what happened to people who did let them in. Sudden illness, streaks of bad luck, even death in some cases. Some people theorized that the kids were supernatural beings. Demons, vampires, maybe something else. Others believed that they were some kind of alien entity, that they were sent to observe or manipulate humans. It sounded crazy, like something out of a scary movie, but after what I'd seen, I didn't argue with it. Maybe scary movies were actually real. I kept thinking about what he said, too. "I can't leave unless you let me in." That phrase stuck with me. It sounded like it wasn't just a normal request, that it was a rule. Whatever that thing was, it couldn't hurt me unless I gave it permission. No normal child could do the things that that boy had done. No human could move the way he moved, disappear the way he disappeared, or speak with that eerie calmness that chilled me to my core. Whatever he wasn't like us. This is for anybody willing to read what I have to say. Feel free to share it wherever. If you can, tag me or let me know where I can go to see responses. I've always thought of myself as a rational person. I'm not one to jump to conclusions or believe in wild stories about ghosts or other strange things. But what happened to me changed the way that I see the world. It was late autumn. It was the time of year where evenings seem to close in faster than you're ready for. The sun was setting and the air had that bite of the winter creeping in. I was in my backyard, finishing up some chores before it got completely dark. My house backs up to a wooded area. Nothing too big, just a few tall trees and some overgrown shrubs. I'd lived there for about 5 years by then, and it had always been quiet. That evening, I was putting away some gardening tools that I'd left out. The sun was low, throwing long shadows across the yard. It wasn't completely dark yet, but the light had taken on that dull grayish hue. As I moved around, though, I couldn't shake this weird feeling of the creeps that I was getting for no good reason. At first, I told myself it was easy to get spooked when you're outside alone at dusk, especially near the woods. But that feeling just wouldn't go away. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see a bear or a deer or a raccoon rustling around in the brush. Instead, the yard was eerily still. I was just about to head back inside when I saw a child standing just outside of that wooded area. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old, standing there so still it was worrisome. At first, I thought maybe it was one of the neighbor's kids that had wandered over, but the longer I stared, the less it made sense. He was too far away for me to make out much detail at first, but something about him just didn't feel right. He wore plain clothes that were too light for the chill in the air. Even from that distance, he looked pale. "Hey," I called out. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" But he just shook his head and stared at me. I took a step forward, concerned for this little kid, but something in me screamed to stop. I stopped immediately. It was like everything in my body was firing at 100% at that point, saying, "Don't go any further." I couldn't help but listen to that. I couldn't explain it. I felt this overwhelming sense of alarm, like I was standing on the edge of a cliff and any movement that I made would send me falling over the edge. The child took the smallest step, but it felt like I was standing in front of a dangerous animal at that point. And then he said, "Can I come in?" The question hit me hard. I felt like I was in deep trouble. There was no reason for a kid to say that. Not in my backyard and not like this. Especially a kid that I had no idea who he was. My throat went dry, and my first instinct was to back away. "Are you okay?" I asked again. I had no intention of letting this kid into my home. I just wanted to make sure that he was safe. But he didn't answer again. He just kept looking down at the ground. But then he looked up at me. We were close enough now to when I saw the eyes, I realized it was one of those situations where it was going to be a bad ending. It was one of those moments where you realize just how bad of a situation you're actually in. His eyes looked the way that the demons do in Supernatural, except this was real life. I actually yelled when I saw them. "Oh shit!" It was like nothing that I'd ever seen. Now, one can say it was a child pulling a prank on me with contacts, but the way my body felt, the way my survival instincts were firing off, I just knew it in my soul that this was not a prank. This was something that was life or death. They were not contacts. This wasn't a prank. Those eyes were solid black. No whites, no pupils, just solid, dark voids. I stumbled back and said he needed to leave, but the child didn't even move or blink. He just started staring at me again. And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he turned and walked back into the woods. There was no hurry. There was no fear. Just this calm, steady stepping until the shadows seemed to swallow him up. I stood there for a moment, frozen in place. But the creeping dread in my chest told me otherwise. Something about that kid was wrong. I didn't stay outside much longer than that. As soon as I could get my legs moving, I hurried inside, locked the door behind me. My hands were shaking so bad it took 2 tries to latch the deadbolt. I didn't know why this kid had instilled such fear. I stood there for a moment, staring out at the kitchen window that overlooked the backyard. The trees were dark silhouettes now. The sun was completely gone. Everything looked normal, but I was worried that that kid was still out there. I tried to calm myself. I turned on all the lights in the house and put on the TV, even though I wasn't really watching it. I double-checked the locks on every door and window, something that I rarely did in this neighborhood. But as the hours went by, I'd catch myself looking out the windows. The house was quiet, but I couldn't relax. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, just being generally spooked and nervously and mindlessly scrolling through my phone. What happened next was enough to make anyone a believer. I heard a knock at my front door. At first, I thought that I had imagined it. I froze, my phone in hand, and just listened. But then the knock came again. 3 sharp raps, deliberate and patient. My chest tightened. I didn't move. I looked at the clock on my microwave. It was after 10 o'clock. Who in the hell would be knocking? And why would they knock like that? And then the knocks came again. I crept toward the window in the living room. I had that same feeling as when I was outside. I looked through the blinds. I saw nothing at first. The porch light was enough to light up the driveway too. But then I saw the same kid, standing on the porch, almost hiding in the shadows, and my breath caught in my throat. He looked the same as before. Pale, small, and unnervingly creepy. He was concentrating so hard on the door, it looked like he was trying to look through the door. "You need to let me in." I backed away from the door as silently as possible, hoping that he hadn't seen me. If I pretended to not be home, maybe he'd just go away. It didn't work. "I know you're there. Please, it's cold out here. Let me in." His voice wasn't pleading, though. It was flat, and it didn't have any emotion in it like some child really would. It was like he was reading a line from a script. Every instinct in me screamed to keep that door locked. The air felt thick with something that I couldn't explain, and still can't. I grabbed my phone, ready to dial 911, but I swear to you, before I could even press send, my damn phone died. It shouldn't have died. It had plenty of battery. That was the only way I could call for help. I ran to my room to put it on the charger, but the knocking didn't stop. If anything, it sounded like the voice was getting louder too, like it was inside my head. This was crazy. The voice didn't sound like a child anymore either. It was almost mocking. I stood there, frozen in the middle of the room, clutching my phone, not even moving enough to put it on the charger. The knocking was steady now, like a metronome. My legs felt heavy, but I forced myself to keep moving. I went over to my side of the bed, put the phone on the charger, and waited for it to turn back on. In my bedroom, there's this sliding door that leads to the backyard. You can probably guess what I'm about to tell you next. Yep. Before my stupid phone turned back on, that kid started knocking on the sliding door, like he knew I had gone into that room, like he followed me around the house. Maybe he was reading my mind. I don't know. But he knew where I was, and that made it all the creepier. He was just standing outside the sliding door, looking in. The child was closer now than he'd ever been. The porch light lit up his face, and I could see every detail. His skin was so pale it looked sickly. There was a faint shadow of a smile on his lips, but it was like that smile was forced. And then, of course, there were those pitch black eyes. "Let me in. I need your help." He was too calm, too smooth to be a kid that needed help. The way he talked was almost hypnotic. My head felt foggy for a moment, like I was being pulled towards the door against my will, but I shook it off and yelled at him to go away. The child's face didn't change. He just stared at me, as if he couldn't quite understand why I wouldn't let him in. "You have to let me in." Now, I've watched enough movies in my time to know one thing. Whatever he was, you couldn't let him inside. There was no way in hell I was going to give this thing an invitation to come get me. I looked at my phone. The stupid thing was finally back on. I picked it up and waved it at whatever that thing was outside and said that I was calling the cops. He nodded and took a step back. I felt like he was disappointed, even though he lacked the ability to actually show that emotion. And then he said, "You don't have to do that. You should have just let me in." He turned and walked away from the slider after that, and I lost him in the darkness. But I wasn't about to get closer to the glass to take a look. I went back into the living room, and finally worked up the courage to peek through the blinds. It was dark out there. The porch was empty. The child was gone. I stayed crouched in my living room until the first light of dawn finally broke through the windows and I felt a rush of relief. I spent the morning checking every door and window, making sure nothing had been tampered with. Everything was just as I'd left it, like the whole encounter had been a bad dream. But I definitely know that it wasn't. I didn't know what to do. Who would even believe me if I told them? It wasn't like I had any evidence. There was no proof that whatever this thing was had even been at my house. But I knew this for certain. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't a human child. In the days after the encounter, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Like that goes without saying, I think. I avoided the backyard, kept every door locked, and made sure the curtains were drawn after sunset. But no matter how hard I tried to distract myself, the image of that pale, expressionless face and those horrible eyes wouldn't leave my mind. What had I seen? These black-eyed kids sound like something out of a bad horror movie, but there are more witnesses than I like to think about that claim to have seen pale, strange-looking children. And those children always have black eyes. They always ask to be let in, whether that's a car or a house or somewhere else. And the accounts are all very similar too. They all have that same voice. Maybe it's hypnotic, and it's emotionless. You feel this overwhelming sense of fear when they're around. And they always have this insistence that they need permission to enter. I don't know what to believe. The way he made me feel was that the world felt wrong, like reality itself was bending around him. It makes me think that whatever it is, it's not of this world. Part of me wonders if I should have called someone that night, like a priest or someone else who knows about this kind of thing. But what would I say? How would I explain it without sounding crazy? What did he want? Why me? Was he just testing me? Or did I interrupt something by being in the backyard that night? And the biggest question of all that I have is what would have happened if I had let him in?